I don't know.
It's free beer.
I got some right here.
So, it was about 25 years ago that I decided I wanted to make it possible to use a computer and have freedom, which was impossible because at the time all the operating systems were proprietary. So you had to sign a non-disclosure agreement just to get a binary. You were forbidden to share with other people. You couldn't get the source code. And so basically you were shafted. Well, I better plug this thing in right now. Sorry, where's the socket?
Right there.
No, it doesn't look like it.
There's one by the registration.
Just give it to me, I'll take care of it for you.
So you couldn't get the source code, so you couldn't study it, you couldn't change it, and you couldn't share it. So you were basically tied hand and foot. That's what proprietary software does to people. And my experience using free software and seeing proprietary software convinced me that proprietary software was simply evil, that it was something that had to be eliminated from the world in order to have a good, ethical world. So I began developing the GNU system.
Like bad social skills?
What?
It had to be eliminated like bad social skills?
No, actually, bad social skills fits in a class with a lot of things that are unfortunate, but they're not evil. There's a very big difference between something that nobody should ever do and something that maybe some people can't help doing. Right? Some people will be bad at social interactions at least some of the time, even despite trying their best. Well, what can you do? Nobody's perfect. You can't say, from now, starting today, everybody must be perfect in a certain, even in a certain area of life. But when conduct is malicious, when it mistreats others, then yes, you can say, nobody should do this anymore. We have to stop. Even if it takes time to convince people, even if you never 100% put an end to it, still you can say this is wrong. Nobody should ever do this, and when they do, we shouldn't tolerate it. In any case, we can see the success and the lack of success of the free software movement in this computer, which is over here. Now, this is a laptop which can't suspend. Suspend and resume has not yet been implemented for it, which is a bit of an inconvenience. And it doesn't have power management implemented at all. So it, even my large external battery gets emptied in 5 hours. So I have about 8 hours total usage in it without a power source. But there is no non-free software in it as far as we can tell anywhere. It's a 100% free software laptop. The first one I found, except for this one, which comes pretty close. There's a little bit of non-free firmware in these, and the program that runs the wireless network is non-free. I was using an OLPC until a few days ago. And I chose it because it had a free BIOS.
Open firmware.
That's different, I think.
No, it's running open firmware. It doesn't have a BIOS.
I thought it has core boot in it, right?
It's open firmware.
So you're saying it doesn't have core boot in it? I thought it did. Oh, in any case. In any case, so I got one of these and I switched to it and I deleted the non-free program that runs the built-in wireless device, so it's not functional. Well, one can live with that. There are ways to work around that problem. In any case, as I was switching to it, Negroponte was betraying us. He decided to make it easy in the future for people to field convert these machines to Windows, which means you can expect that that's what most schools, most governments will do, which means that I'm sad to say this will probably be a path for leading millions of children under the power of an evil megacorporation. But ironically, it was still the most ethical choice for me to use, because it still didn't have a proprietary BIOS in it like the PC I'd been using before and like everything else I knew about. So I kept using it. And then I found out about another kind of computer, that one, which is made by Remote. And it's not a PC. It doesn't have an Intel-style CPU. And as far as we can tell, all the software really is free. So now I've switched to that. Well, this was a pain in the neck for me. This keyboard is very hard to use. I had to basically Velcro on a happy hacking keyboard on top of it to make it usable. And then there wasn't enough space, so I had to have an external disk to keep most of my files in, and many other things were inconvenient. It crashed very often, but I had escaped from a proprietary BIOS. Now, that computer is a little bit more reliable, except for the keyboard. But at least I can type on its keyboard. I still use the happy hacking keyboard sometimes. And it's more convenient a little than this, but still not as convenient as what I was using before. But for the first time, it's a laptop you can get that comes with all free software. And it looks like there may be others in the future too. And this is actually a prototype, and they aren't selling it. But they're going to sell another one. And there are various other companies which we may be able to get laptops from that run with all free software. So, little by little, we are winning. And yet, most computer users still use proprietary operating systems. Even worse, most users of the gnu+linux system, or BSD, which are the two fundamentally free operating systems, still use non-free software with them. In fact, of the thousands of distros of gnu+linux, nearly all of them come with or suggest for installation non-free programs. And of the 3 distributions of BSD, all of them do.
This is, as far as I know, we have all 3 drivers.
Yes, the drivers in this are all free, I believe. Except that there's that program. There's a program that runs the wireless device.
Oh yeah, I understand on the chip.
Yeah.
I'm saying in the software, in the distribution.
Right.
As far as I know, it's all.
Well, that's no. That program is in the distribution. You see, that program is in /firmware or something like that. And every time the system starts up, it copies that piece of firmware into the chip that runs wireless.
Okay, so there's that one. Yeah.
So
you might like to know that Marvell has promised that the next edition of that chip for the XO2 will not contain any proprietary software.
oh, great. Well, that's a step forward. If only we could expect the XO2 to most often run with this system, then it would still be a good thing. Maybe even a little better than before. But so this shows how we are gradually making progress, but most computer users still have not come to recognize in a non-free program a threat to their freedom. And that is the most important thing of all for us to do in order to establish freedom in a durable way. Because how did it happen that almost all gnu/linux distros include non-free software? How did it happen that Linux includes non-free software? It happened because of people who didn't think that that mattered. And it's going to keep on happening until we teach enough people that it does matter. Until enough people say no to that. And say no way to non-free software. I was visiting a free software activist who had set up a speech, and he didn't have a phone that I could make an international call from. So he said, come to my office, you could do it there. So I went to his office, and I said, oh, where's the phone? And
web services, online applications, online software?
Well, their web servers do many different things. And some of them are no problem. But if you use somebody else's computer to do your computing with your data, then you are giving up your control over something you should have control over. So you shouldn't do that.
Okay, so where does the GPL can apply?
The GPL has nothing to do with it.
GPL is only one of many
A
free
license,
licenses.
no, but that's not the point. The point is a license can't solve that problem. It doesn't matter whether for this particular issue, it makes no difference whether the software in that web server is free. It makes no difference to you as a user. Now, it is an important issue for the guy who runs the server. For his sake, I hope he's insisted on free software, because if not, he's given up his freedom. But for you as a user of his server, it doesn't help you if that software is free.
Actually, it does in the case of security.
Well, no, but that's a different issue. Don't change the subject.
It's not the
point
same
is,
as the freedom issue.
You lose control of your computing by doing it on his server. And you do that even if every piece of software he's running on that server is published free software.
I should own my own server.
Well, you should do your computing, you should do
No, it's on loan.
your computer, your
Because we have 5 in the booth. Sorry?
because that's the only way you control it.
Actually,
But there are many other things that web servers do which don't raise this issue. So for instance, simple websites where you look at somebody's articles, there's no problem there. Or e-commerce. I don't do e-commerce because it's not anonymous. But if you don't mind that, I mean, I don't see why it's any worse than phoning somebody and telling them your credit card. But the point is, that's not your computing. That's a transaction you're doing with him. So there's no reason why you should have the control over it. So I don't see an issue. And then there are things like Wikipedia where people work together to do a computing project. That's not your computing. If you help edit Wikipedia, you're not doing your computing. It's Wikipedia's computing which you are participating in.
Even if it's free, it's evil. Because I don't own the data.
No, I'm saying Wikipedia is okay. The issue doesn't arise because you're not doing your computing.
Okay, by the way, pizza's here.
Yeah. Hooray! So it's time. I have to eat a little bit and then leave.
Okay, do your thing.
I told him, I can't have Skype on my computer. It's non-free software. Anybody who puts in a message what his Skype account is essentially saying, hey everybody, use non-free software with me. People shouldn't say that kind of thing if they want to promote freedom. So, we have a lot of work to do. And we're going to keep doing it. And thank all of you for supporting this work.
Questions for Richard?
Well, you started off saying that the proprietary software is evil. I mean, I always think evil means there's a gun, it's plunder or oppression.
Well,
But
no.
what do you mean by, why is it evil?
That's what I mean. Well, I mean evil in the same sense that you are thinking of. But I don't define it as equivalent to using a gun. I'm not a right-wing anarchist. And I don't believe that everything is good except using force.
But what's evil about it? You didn't give
It
it
subjugates people. It makes the person, it makes the user helpless. So, to see the evil, you have to look at the 4 freedoms that define free software. So I'm going to shut this down so it can recharge. This laptop has a problem that it can't charge its battery when it's running. So, this is an example of the kind of little sacrifices that I make for freedom, which don't make me any great hero, But what do you think of somebody who won't even make little sacrifices for freedom? Anyway, so the 4 freedoms are: freedom 0, the freedom to run the program as you wish; freedom 1, the freedom to study the source code and change it to make the program do what you wish; freedom 2 is the freedom to help your neighbor, which is the freedom to distribute exact copies of the program to others when you wish; and freedom 3 is the freedom to contribute to your community, which is the freedom to distribute copies of your modified versions to others when you wish. So with these 4 freedoms, all the users can do what they want, and in particular they can make their computers do what they want. The users control their computing, and cooperation between the users is also encouraged and permitted. So what does proprietary software do? People are forbidden to share, and that is directly evil, because dividing people is an injustice to them. And everyone who signs a license saying he will not share has committed an evil himself directly by making that promise. And then the developer has total control over what the program does, because the users don't have the source code. So you're under the power of somebody else. Now, if using computers was something that a few people did rarely, it might not matter. But when you live a lot of your life using computers, it's intolerable for anyone to have that kind of power over you. But of course, the idea that something is unjust, whatever that something might be, is an idea that on which people have cultural views and on which they can be influenced by their culture. Many things that we consider evil were accepted at one time in the past, and some still are in some places. And people who use computers mostly started with proprietary software, surrounded by other uses of proprietary software, so they just took for granted that proprietary software was okay.
Excuse me, I'd like to contradict that. My father was one of the early computer users at a time when there was no proprietary software.
Right, but that's very few people. Most computer users today, right, starting in the 60s probably, or maybe the late 50s.
In the 50s.
But in any case, that doesn't contradict what I said. You're right.
But we started with freedom, and then we moved to...
But most computer users started with proprietary software. Most computer users started since 1990.
Right.
And they started with proprietary software, and everyone else they knew was using proprietary software. In fact, in 1990, you still couldn't run a computer without proprietary software. There was no free modern system yet. And so they just took for granted that that's the way it is.
I know one way you could do it if you ran a Forth-only system.
Was there a free implementation of Forth in 1990?
Yeah. Well, free. There were published versions that you could change and distribute. Yes.
Oh, well, maybe they were free.
Big Forth.
What was that?
Forth is a programming language that was designed originally for pointing telescopes and is now the basis of open firmware.
So I have a...
Do you work on open firmware?
Mitch Bradley does the main work on open firmware.
But it sounds like you're involved with it.
I can get inside it, but I don't actually do the work.
So I have a question about kind of the dividing line between, free and open source software and the underlying...
Well,
hardware.
actually, free and open source are not the same.
Okay. Pick one, and we'll talk about that one.
I should talk about the difference between them, and then we can continue with your question, because I'm not blowing you off.
Okay.
But this is really important. The free software movement is about ethics. It's about freedom and social solidarity. So what we say is letting people cooperate in control of their computing is right, stopping them is wrong. Now, there are a lot of techies who don't like talk about right and wrong, and they don't want to reject any possible solution that might be convenient. So in the mid-90s, there was a big debate in the free software community between the people who support the idea of the free software movement and people who just like the software because it's convenient. And in 1998, the latter group started using the term open source. And they chose that term partly because the word free is ambiguous, and they thought, well, if they don't say the word free, they won't have trouble with that ambiguity. But also partly because they wanted to hush up the freedom side of things. And so they didn't want to allude to that at all. By using a new term, they could avoid ever mentioning that there was an issue of freedom. And open source people never say that it's wrong not to make a program open source. All they talk about is practical advantages of doing so. They treat non-open source programs as fine. And they only judge programs by their convenience. That's why I don't support open source, and that's why the FSF doesn't support open source. We're not in favor of their philosophy. And we don't want to talk about our software by their term, because if we did, we'd be boosting them. You know, if you're in the Green Party, you don't put up signs saying Democrat everywhere. Or Republican, for whatever difference it makes. So, that's why in the FSF, we never talk about open source, except to say that it's something we don't agree with and why. Now, mostly it's the same set of software. Not exactly. There are a few exceptions, but they're rare. So if you find out that there is a program and you're told it's open source, well, you can be almost certain it's free software, but not quite. But in any case, so it's almost the same body of software. And if you're only interested in the body of software, well, you might call it free software and open source, and if you don't want to take a side. But we are a side. We want to take our side, so we don't do that most of the time. We just call it free software. Anyway, so you're talking about the difference between free software and...
Well, I'll get back to that in a second, but now I'm still trying to untangle something. All right, so use Skype as an example. I mean, from an end user perspective, that's free.
No, it's not, because you don't have the 4 freedoms.
Because it's not open source.
Well, because you don't get the source code. There's no need to use, quote, open source, unquote, to define what free software stands for, any more than the Green Party has to define its platform in terms of the Democratic Party platform. The official definition of open source, although it's written very differently, is almost equivalent to the definition of free software. It doesn't, that's the other thing. Almost everyone misunderstands that term. It's even worse than free software in terms of likeliness of misunderstanding. It doesn't mean what you think.
I'm living proof, okay. So what I was going to ask, though, was there's an underlying infrastructure. There's the chip that is hosting the
Well, the chip is a physical object.
It's a physical object.
Yeah.
But it's clearly something that has a bunch of IP bound up in.
You should never use that term. You should never use that term.
Okay.
Right, because that's confusion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Intellectual property, quote unquote, refers to several different laws that work totally differently and are about different things.
Okay.
And to treat those laws as if they were one is total confusion already. It means misunderstanding what the laws say and what they do.
And that's apart from the fact that much of intellectual property law is actually about intellectual theft.
But in any case, to speak what? I guess so. To speak as if there were a thing called intellectual property is terribly confusing.
Or to speak as if it was property in any form.
I mean, there is copyrighted works, there is copyrighted text, but it's not clear that anything in a chip is copyrightable. The circuits are not copyrightable.
Okay. Well, all right. So
And patents do something totally different. There may be patents that are infringed by making a chip, but every patent is about a general idea, and many different things can infringe the same patent even though they're quite different from each other. So the patent isn't in the chip. So it's really confusing. It sounds like it makes sense because it's based on a totally wrong view of what copyright is and what patents are and what trademarks are and what trade secret contracts do. And
might I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
Sure. I'd gladly pick up this conversation after, but a lot of people here like, know this topic really well, and there's a lot of other members. It's okay.
In any case,
and I'll pick up the
ideas of free software don't apply to a chip because there are no copiers for them. And they don't really apply to a chip design because we don't all have fab lines. But someday, 50 years from now, that may be different. 50 years from now, it might make sense to say, I insist on running computers made that I compiled out of free computer designs because I wouldn't trust anything else. But that world is imaginable, but it's not the world of today. And it's very important not to insist that we solve all the problems that the world may have in the future today, because technical advances that will make certain theoretical problems become important may also give us the means to solve them.
Like an algorithm, it seems like to me that's a discovery. There's no basis for a patent.
Well, that's a different question. You're talking about whether legally it should be patentable, based on patent law and its traditions. But I think of that as a policy question. I don't ask, or at least I don't think the main question is, based on the tradition of patent law, what answer would come out. I ask, what's best for society?
And you may well think that algorithm patents are evil, like I do.
Well, I think they're evil also. But the reason is because of their effects, and not just because of what the tradition of patent law happened to say.
Can I bring us back to your phone call for this lengthy conversation? Sorry.
The phone call that came to the question of Skype.
You could make with Skype brings to my mind, where do you draw the line? Can you use a cell phone? Because cell phone.
Well, these days, actually, I've never had a cell phone. I have never owned or possessed for any length of time a cell phone.
What is
And the reason is, but that's nothing that. But listen. This is a complex set of issues here. 10 years ago, a cell phone did not function as a computer for the user. Nobody could install software in their cell phones. But there was a very bad thing about cell phones, which is they were tracking devices. Big Brother knows where the phone is. Not even when it's supposedly switched off, Big Brother still knows where it is. And I felt that that's simply unacceptable, and that it was my duty as a citizen not to participate. That is why I have never had a cell phone. And later on it became possible to turn them on remotely to listen to people. So trackers could do it, and of course the phone company could do it, and Big Brother's men could do it, which is the worst danger of all. And I found out that they transmit these signals even when they're supposedly switched off. They still every so often
at least take the battery
have to take all the batteries out to make them stop. Well, as the technology advanced and the phones became more powerful, it got to the point where you could install software in them. And that meant that they were functioning as computers for the user. And that crosses the line that I concluded was the relevant line, to the point where you cannot ignore anymore the issue of free or non-free software.
Sorry, you should just let me know it's just coming to past 7.
Is the pizza here? Shit. I'm hungry.
It's due to
Anyway, so I'll keep speaking and ask you questions a little bit longer before I give up and leave without eating. But in any case, because, I had a microwave oven a long time ago, I think, or else I at least saw them. And it occurred to me that maybe there were programs in them, but I didn't really know, because you can't tell. No, but what you know is that if it is a computer in there, users are not installing software in there. So the result is it might as well be a circuit. You can't even tell whether it's a circuit without taking the thing apart. So it might as well be a circuit. But When?
ATM.
What about what?
What about an ATM? Do you ever use
I don't own an ATM. I don't have an ATM.
Okay, so only not using.
You're using vague words, so you're asking meaningless questions that don't enable me to give a meaningful answer. I don't mind using somebody else's computer once in a while, regardless of what software it has in it. If I'm visiting somebody that has a Windows machine, I'll use it to browse the net for a few minutes if it's convenient for me to do so. It's not important. It's not an important right or wrong for me whether I will touch this computer. But what I won't do is have one set up for me running non-free software.
I wanted to know where you're drawing the line.
I wasn't clear. There are many different lines about many different issues. I didn't understand.
Can we go back to the phone? You had got to where the phone had become a computer and you could install software.
Right, so that meant that the free software issue applies to it also. And that's the case nowadays. Nowadays, if you have a cell phone which has proprietary software, then it's just like having a PC with Windows. And it might even be Windows. Who knows? But the point is, it's just as wrong. There's no important difference between them now. But 10 years ago, there was an important difference. 10 years ago, the phone was more like the microwave oven. And the only thing bad about it was that it was like a microwave oven that told Big Brother every time you cook anything.
So how do you feel about OpenMoco?
OpenMoco was a good thing. I spoke with them about several issues to make sure that what they would do would fit what I think are the right standards.